Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. As always, wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you're listening to us on, thank you guys so much for all the support, all the messages, all the things that you've sent to me, all the things that you've sent to the show. Love hearing from you guys. Love hearing your questions. Love hearing the things that you got going on in your coaching world or your basketball world. Love connecting with you guys and exchanging ideas back and forth. I feel like as much as you guys learn from this, I learn from you guys with the experiences and the stories that you share with me. So keep those coming, and let's jump right in here with our episode today. As I talked about just before I started recording, I know a lot of you listening are either potentially in situations now where you're taking a new spot, or you probably know at least one or two people who are in positions where they're taking over a program. And for a lot of coaches who are taking over in a new program, they might be in situations where they feel like they are kind of building from the ground up. They're building a program from scratch. There may not be a lot of, groundwork or a lot of foundation that was there previously, and they're, trying to get things going and get things started in the right direction. So because there's so many people who are in that situation, I love getting the opportunity to talk to guests who are in that boat and kind of have them share those ideas of the things that they're building, what they're putting in on offense and defense, kind of their practice planning, and just the overall process of kind of building something from scratch and getting the program off and running. So that's what we're going to get into today with my guest, who is currently the varsity boys coach at Whittier Tech. Very happy today to be joined by Coach David Stein. Coach, again, really appreciate you being able to come on here and chat with us. How are things going?
Very good, Coach. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk some hoops and maybe give an advice for one or two out there that could benefit.
Definitely. I'm sure you will, Coach. So let's jump right in with your journey, Coach. Talk us through where this great game of basketball has taken you, where your coaching journey has taken you, and ultimately, how and why did you decide to end up at Whittier Tech?
Yeah, so I'm only 26, which I don't know if I actually am. I'm probably the youngest varsity coach in Massachusetts, but I've had a lot of great experiences that have kind of guided me along the way and gotten me to where I am now. So played in high school, played for Tewksbury High School in Massachusetts, did that from 2014 to 2017. And when I was there, when I was growing up, Tewksbury was kind of the bottom dweller of the league that they were in. And when I was in high school, like the kids in the grade above me, they were fantastic. And I really got to see some really high level hoops, and that really drew my interest in playing. And ever since high school, I've been coaching in a variety of ways, and it's helped me tremendously. So one thing I do every year is I work at a basketball camp in Massachusetts. It's very popular. It's called Hooptown. It's out of Andover, Mass, and anyone in Mass probably has heard about it. But their coach, David Fazio, he's been doing this for over 35 years, and he's been a tremendous mentor to me. I've always loved that. And right after high school, I started coaching in the summer league, just kind of getting my feet wet with that. I knew I wanted to stay involved in the program, and I did that for a good chunk of time. And then went on to college. I still did the summer league here and there, but at the 2021-2022 year, Tewksbury got a new head coach, and he wanted me to be involved. He knew I coached before in the summer, so I did the summer and the fall. And then I came on as a volunteer basically for Tewksbury High School in that 2021-22 year. And I basically just was a student of the game. I was volunteering as a freshman coach, and he basically said, well, if you want to come along and be part of varsity practices, we'll find stuff for you to do. And I was really young and ambitious, and I just kind of hit the ground running. I did everything. I went to both practices. I scouted games. I helped make practice plans, and I grew pretty quickly in the program at Tewksbury. So those first 2 years, I went from being an assistant. I jumped mid-year to like the freshman coach. I was a varsity assistant on the bench. And then last year 2023, 2024, I was a full-time assistant coach, like I knew I was starting to get to a point where I was picking up a lot and I really wanted to make a jump to a varsity coach position if one opened. And at the end of that season, I think both the guy I coached with, Steve Boudreau, and myself, we kind of sat down at the end of the season, and he knew I wanted more, and he kind of knew that there wasn't any room for that at Tewksbury. So I left. I interviewed for a few different jobs, and I came down to a finalist for about three different varsity positions, and I got to a point where I didn't really know what I was going to do. I was kind of, reaching out to people I knew, and eventually Whittier Tech, I knew someone very well, mentor, friend of mine who is an alumni there, and he knew that there was going to be an opening, and he told me, hey, you should email the AD, like tell him, hey, you're interested. And luckily, I was one of five people they interviewed, came back for a second one. They really liked me. And thankfully, just a couple weeks before the season, I got hired there and, never looked back. It's been awesome. I love Whittier. We have a great program, great kids there. It's a vocational school in Haverhill, Massachusetts. So a lot of these kids are primarily focused on their trade, but we get a lot of really good athletes. And so I've done that. And then this spring, I took up coaching AAU for an eighth grade team just to kind of like do something and help the guy that helped me get the job at Whittier. He runs an AAU program. So, yeah, like I said, I'm only 26, but I've probably, basketball has been a huge part of my life, and coaching, especially probably the last 4 years, it's consumed a big part of my life, but I love it. It goes hand in hand with my day job as a teacher. So,
Mm.
yeah, it's been great.
How did you, as you mentioned, with your youth, and in some cases, obviously you have experience, of course, but not tons of obviously like varsity level head coaching experience. So in those interviews, with not having as maybe as much experience as maybe other candidates did, what do you think you did or said or presented in those interviews that helped make you stand out? Because I'm sure a lot of people listening maybe are either in that position where they're relatively young and trying to secure that position, or maybe they know somebody is. So, kind of what advice would you give to somebody who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience but can still, win over people and still do well in those interviews?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it comes down to a couple things. I think the first thing that not just young people, I think people in general that go for head coaching jobs sometimes fail to recognize is more often than not, they're not necessarily looking for the guy or the woman who has the highest basketball IQ. And I think that's where a lot of people get lost. They want to show that they run this really good offense, they have a really good defense, but ultimately, I think what a lot of these schools are looking for is just a program builder. They
Mm.
want someone who can come in and like, how are you going to build a culture? How are you going to work with kids in terms of academics? How are you going to get involved with these youth programs in the community? And so I think catering what you're going to say to them around that stuff is much more important, because I went on about 4 or 5 varsity coaching interviews, and I'd say maybe like 10-15% of it revolves around like your actual basketball knowledge, and like half of it, I'd say basically all of it, it will be like, what's your offensive and defensive philosophy? So they're not looking necessarily for people who are, these real big brain basketball guys. Like that might be for like a really high level coaching job, but at that point you're facing guys with a lot of experience. But for a lot of these kind of rebuild or like startup programs, like doing that. And then also too, I think I benefit from the fact that I am a teacher, and like part of the reason Whittier really went with me over someone else, I think, was because I really sold them on the fact that, hey, like I want to be fully immersed in this community. I want to be, a teacher here, work with kids during the day, and then transition that onto the court. So I think if you're in that type of position too, like selling yourself is like, well, you're not just getting a basketball coach, you're also getting a teacher in the school as well. So those are a couple of things I consider for someone who's kind of going for these jobs.
Yeah, it's really a good point where you have to really present, right, that you want to be there at that school, and you're kind of bought into building a program at that location. Because to your point, I think a lot of people who are hiring maybe have like kind of a baseline expectation that this person has like basketball understanding and basketball knowledge, but they really want to know why that candidate wants to be at that specific school and why they're bought into being at that program. And I think that if you tailor it towards here's why I'm excited to be at this school, that could definitely be something that's a huge kind of advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the one
Coach,
thing
what I
I'll
wanted
always,
to follow up with is also something that I know you're passionate about, which is about skill development. So, can you talk to us about what aspects of skill development you're really passionate about, and also what is your kind of approach in teaching those skills?
yeah. So when it comes to skill development, I think when you think of coaching in general, it has to be like the number one most important thing you do. I think a lot of times we get caught up in, our philosophies or like what plays we want to run or things like that. Um, just from watching like certain teams play, I think it's pretty obvious like what teams like prioritize like getting better and developing skills versus like running plays or things like that. Um, I think it should be based really on like what you prioritize as a team and what buys into your identity. If you're someone that wants to run drills, like, they need to be things that are catered towards your offense or your defense. Like you shouldn't be doing zigzags if you're not running like full court man. You want it to be aligned with who you are and what you're trying to do. I think something that people struggle with, and even I struggle with, is like this idea that we can't like boil the ocean, right? Like we can't develop every single skill we want. So you have to kind
Right.
of decide like what you think is best. And you're not always going to get it right. But I think if you kind of like decide for yourself, okay, we're going to pick two or three things that we can really prioritize and get better at, like that's what we're going to sell ourselves on. And if you can get better at other stuff, that's nice. But realistically, you want kids to be like really good at a couple things, I think, in my opinion. Um, we want kids that are going to be technically skilled. We want them to be mentally tough, and that's what your skill development should focus on. So for us, like for me, the things that I really prioritize, like shooting is the number one thing. I think it's like the separator in high school hoops. We spend a lot of time developing shooting. So we do stuff like form shooting every day at practice. We work on how we catch the ball. We work on how to be ready, like, your footwork and how you catch the ball, catch to shoot mindset. Like you have to have all these things just because teams are going to cater towards like better shooters. Like if you can get teams that can get stretched out defensively, it opens you up. But if you have guys that are just, you can't shoot, like, you're clogging lanes and it's going to hurt you. So when we kind of decide who we're putting in the game, we really try to get as many shooters on the floor as possible. And luckily at Whittier, we've had a couple of kids who are already very good, but we spent a lot of time developing a few other guys, and it's definitely made a lot of progress. But I wouldn't just sit there and be like, just shoot a lot. You have to really
Mm,
teach the mechanics of it and get to that position. Cause like, it's kind of like golf. Like you can hit the driving range and hit 100 balls, but if you're not like practicing with intent, then you're just never going to get any better. And then the other thing we really stress is footwork. Like I love Jay Wright, former Villanova coach, and I grew up with him. And a lot of the stuff that he preaches, like we incorporate every day. I love how they play off 2 feet. They catch and square to the basket. They understand like off a basket or off a dribble drive, like when to cut, how to cut, ripping by guys, like establishing a pivot foot. Those are all like things I think are
mm-hmm.
so essential.
Yep.
And it really doesn't matter what offense you run. It's very universal across the board, those two things. Something I'm going to try this season is something called impossible training. I know a couple of guys that utilize it. It's basically like training for like different basketball moves and things like that. And a couple of the programs I know that utilize it get a lot of good results out of it. So that's certainly something. And then just defensively, like I think it honestly just comes down to like really developing like one-on-one defense and stance. You can run shell a lot, like a lot of team stuff, I think covers everything, but ultimately, if you can't cover someone one-on-one, you can't play.
Mm,
And it's the hardest thing to tell kids, but I think that's just kind of like a pretty universal thing. Like if you can shoot, have decent footwork and play one-on-one defense, like you should be able to get into into a high school basketball game more often than not.
Right. And I also think too, with shooting too, is one of the mistakes I remember I made when I was younger was not doing a lot of like game like shooting or game like reps. And I found that, I would have these like really good shooters and I'd be like, oh man, we're gonna be a really good shooting team. But then I was like, well, they're only really good when they're, shooting stationary and they're not really tired and everybody looks like a good shooter then. And then they'd get in a game and they'd be tired or they'd be trying to, move off screens or, off ball movement and try and, catch and shoot. And it didn't look as good. So, those game like shots, are also super important. So there's so much that goes into it where guys and girls and that's where I can like look like good shooters in a stationary setting, relaxed without any pressure on them. But as you know, right, completely different situation when it's a game like situation. They've been running down the court up and down the whole time.
Yeah, definitely. I think like too, just on like shooting, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that in the off season, like you
Mm,
really want to spend time like with if you can with your team. Like if you want to do like stationary shooting, then I think that's a great time because it's like you really want to get reps up then and then utilize the in-game season for like game shooting. So we run when we do shooting drills, we really do it based off of like actions in our offense. So like we work on like shooting off the dribble because we run a continuity ball screen, or like we work on like driving kicks and like motion shooting. Like the more of that you can get in, kind of like you said, the better, because then like kids are seeing that in like a 3-on-0 or whatever, and then you actually can translate it into the game.
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely for sure. All right, Coach. Let's start as we move into the topic here about building kind of a program from scratch. So let's jump right in, Coach, into what were your first steps as you look to build the program at Whittier Tech? What was kind of the state of where the program was at upon when you arrived, and then what were your kind of steps to build it right from there?
Yeah, so I think the big thing you have to kind of look at first when you're whether you're interested in applying to a school is kind of seeing, well, where were they, and you kind of have to decide whether or not like this is something you can actually fix, because like there's some programs that unfortunately for a variety of reasons I think aren't necessarily places where you can be successful. So Whittier Tech last year, they went 5-15, and the two best players that they had, they actually transferred to another tech school in our own league. So you're
Mm,
losing your two best players. They had seniors, some kids quit, and they were replacing their entire coaching staff. And there were about 4 or 5 returning varsity players. So that was kind of like the state of the program. And I knew some people that knew the program, and I've kind of watched some film. So just I think the first step was like actually watching film, being like, okay, like what are we working with? So just kind of from watching it from a couple games I could find, it was very clear about two things. One, the team lacks skills to win, but like there were definitely a lot of promising things. It's a school with a lot of very good athletes. That was very clear. I think they just didn't know how to use it to win. And
right.
I knew you could build from that. And then the second thing I realized was like this team was not connected at all. The culture there was very, very bad. They played a like a non they we have a non-league game we play every year against a town right north of us, and they lost by 2, and you could just kind of see from the film like a lot of just finger pointing, like people going off on their own separate ways, bad body language. And so you knew that was going to be the priority. But I really convinced myself like, okay, like this is doable. Like it's not going to maybe click right away,
Right.
but we're going to make this work. So for I got hired 2 weeks before the season. So obviously, if you have more time, it would be fantastic to prep. But what I did was like the second thing was like meet with the program. So we had like a big program wide meeting, and at our school we don't cut. So we had like 90 kids signed up to play. So
Wow.
you got yeah, and so I'm walking into this auditorium. I've never met these kids before, and there's like 90 kids, and they have no idea who you are. And I just kind of laid out like who I am and what my expectations are. Like that was the big thing about like when you first meet the kids in your program, you kind of want to lay out like, okay, what's our culture going to be like? What's the expectations going to be like? And just kind of like meet the varsity players. And I think for them, like you could just see this like excitement coming from them. I think they were really ready for something new. They wanted, you could tell that the previous seasons were pretty rough. So I think they were just really excited about a new coach. So that was step two. The third thing I think you have to do before you even, this is like what's crazy, I think, is like you have to do so much before the season even starts. And that doesn't even account for like how much work you put in season. But I really try to like stay very organized in terms of logistics. So I have like a massive Google Drive folder, and you want to really just get as much stuff put down in like templates and all this stuff as much as you can ahead of time. So like I made like practice plan templates, I made drill banks, I made like game schedules. I had to figure out like what our fundraising looked like what types of things can we do, getting contact info, like putting down like offensive and defensive philosophies in there, like what's our game card going to look like, what sets and stuff, how are we like an installment plan, how are we going to put in stuff offensively and defensively and when. And it takes a lot of time, but like you want all these things in place because obviously not just for yourself but for your entire coaching staff. You want to be as organized as you can. Like you want a place where all your information can be accessible. And we had brand new coaches, like they had to hire basically teachers in the school to coach our JV and freshman team, and they didn't know basketball, like they didn't have a basketball background. And so a lot of this stuff, like it helped them significantly. So like a lot of grunt work, I'd say, like has to be put in before you even start. But like the more you get done, the better. Because obviously, when the season rolls around, it's like you can't even think about some of this other stuff. But
Yeah, you got to just get going. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when we got to tryouts, like I said, we don't cut anyone. And so I didn't really know what to expect that first day. We had like 60 kids come out for varsity basketball, which like to me was just like, it was almost unbelievable. And it's impossible. And I don't know how I did. It was by myself. But I think the big thing that you have to do early if you're rebuilding is you have to identify like young players in your program that you can really build around. We had 8 seniors, but some of them were just kind of on the team because we can't cut anyone, and I didn't want to put these kids on JV. But we, really try to like focus on like, okay, like who are the guys that are going to be your cornerstones the next 3 or 4 years. And we had a lot of guys pretty obviously who like had promise and we were going to invest a lot of time in. I think after that, like it just kind of came down to like, now you have your team, and now it's like, okay, like now you got to put your vision into place. We had a meeting like that very first practice. It was like, I had to kind of gauge like, okay, like how was last year? And like you hear the stories of these kids who are like how bad it was. Like I asked them, like I remember very clearly, it was like, how would you guys rate your culture on a scale of 1 to 10? And like a kid jumped up before like I almost finished. He's like, Coach, it was a straight 0.
Oh
and
man.
so you kind of get an idea of how bad it is, but now it's like you're putting it on the kids to be like, all right, well, like what are we going to do differently then? And they're kind of given all these ideas. And for me, I'm like, all right, well, like if you're leaving this room, like you're buying into like what we just said, like that you guys made the rules, the expectations, like very player led. Like that's something I really believe in. It's like, all right, like you guys, like this is what you're telling me like we're gonna do. So we left and like we're all buying in, and so we get going. I think another thing you got to do early, like obviously, like is build relationships. And like it's really hard when you're coming in brand new, but like you have to kind of go above and beyond, honestly, to kind of get to know these kids. So like I before practice would start, like we had to wait for the girls. Like I'd spend that whole hour like talking to kids, getting to know them. Like, what's your trade? Like, what are you doing? Like, how, like, do you have brothers, sisters? Like, just
Right.
as
Personal
many,
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, just as much as you can. And like, I would like, I had to like text kids like every single day after practice. I'd just be like, hey, like, I thought you did a really good job and like this drill, like, kind of just like, that positive affirmation, like letting them know, like, hey, I think you're doing great, or like, let them know you're being seen. And so, kind of using that, it's like, all right, now you've done like, the basic stuff. And now you're trying to be like, okay, well, now you've laid out your expectations, you've met the kids, you've built with them. And so I'd say the final step and the hardest part, obviously, is like the transformation of like putting your ideas into practice, like building your program from the ground up. So
Right.
for me, I think the biggest thing like that you have to do if you're taking over somewhere is like you have to set the environment that you want your program to be, and you just have to be relentless about it. I think you have very little margin for error, and you have to just kind of be very firm on what you want stuff to be like. So I kind of going back to the meeting, right, about the culture. So like if we turn the ball over and I'm about to see someone point the finger, it's like you have to just step in that moment, right? It's like you either,
Yeah. You got to intervene for sure.
yeah, and you have, and like the first, obviously, like, kids pick it up quick enough, but it's like in those moments right away, it's like kids are going to find out pretty quickly, like, is coach going to let that kind of go by, or is he going to like let it go? And so I think like I really tried to like not just like yell. You don't want to like yell, or if that's how you're going to do it. But for me, I felt like using those as like teaching points. So it's like a kid would turn the ball over and he starts to blame his teammates. Like, okay, trying to explain like, all right, like what can we do instead of just like being pissed off at each other, being like, nope, it's your fault. Like teaching kids actually how to like hold each other accountable and like lift each other up, like next play mentality, I thought was really, really important. And that was like a lot of, but, and even then though, it's like, I feel like that's something you had to do, like we had to do throughout the entire season. And like some kids, they got it quickly. Like we had a kid, Nate, who like I absolutely love. Like it probably didn't click for him until like the very last couple of weeks of the season. But it's like you just have to use that first year to like really, set the stage for like how things are going to be and how you want it to be. Because I think it's easy to start like getting upset about, oh, why are our kids doing this or that? But when you're the guy in charge, you really have to be the one to make these decisions. Um, and then some stuff like I think I noticed would be like skill development for me is huge,
Mm.
but I think something I didn't realize is like, well, when you go from a place, so where I was from in Tewksbury, they played in like probably the best conference in Massachusetts, in my opinion, at least. And there was a lot of stuff that like I think you kind of realize like, oh, this is what a practice looks like. Like the kids get pretty used to it. These are some of like the expectations. And something that like I really struggle with was like the kids weren't actually like buying into like doing some of the skill development stuff. Like they just wanted to play 5-on-5, like all
Right.
practice.
So
That
how'd you
was,
fix that?
I basically just like, I think it just kind of got to a point where I just like kind of looked at them and I was like, guys, like, I hate to, like, you just got to be honest with them. I think to, like, I basically just said, look, guys, like, you guys went 5-15 last year and we're not like, they didn't have any offseason. Like, we're not a very good team. Like,
Mm.
and you're just trying to be honest and you have to just explain to them, like, well, this is why we're doing it. And like, I think the young guys were understanding, like the seniors, they just never really like bought into it. But like, you just have to be like, hard on them and just explain, well, like, this is what's going to get us better. Like, and what you guys did before clearly didn't work. Because I'm like, if you guys played 5-on-5 for 2 hours, like, it explains why you're 5-15. Like, it explains why you don't hit shots in games or like whatever the case is. And so I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
really
Get
like,
that discipline in order of structure and
yeah, I think
practice.
you just had to like, yeah, you just had to really like stick to what you believe in. I think too, like you kind of realize early, like a lot of things like need to you need to develop. Like these kids didn't know, they played zone for like 3 years. Like they didn't know how to close
Mm,
out to the ball. Like we had to start from like square one. And it kind of got to a point where I'm like, well, if you don't want to do it, then like you just won't play. Like if I'm sorry, it's like if you can't close out to a guy, you can't, like how are you supposed to play in a game? If you don't know how to like cut or like be a part of like play within an offense, you can't play. And so it kind of like got to that point where it's like, all right, like kids are pretty quickly now deciding like I'm either going to like do stuff correctly or I'm just going to kind of try to do my own thing. Um, and I guess too, like I didn't even realize like how much you actually have to do. Like they didn't know like how to prepare for a game. Like they didn't know what a scouting, like understanding how a scouting report works, like how you would
yeah,
cover certain kids.
basketball IQ stuff. Yeah.
Like if they watch film, they would just watch it straight through. And I'd be like, well, like, did you ever try clipping the film? Did you ever like, try to understand like what went wrong? Are you watching yourself? Or are you watching the actual team? So I think it's just like every day you just had to be relentless about it. And something I did, I would just like put on my practice plan, like some things like, okay, like we need to just like, we have to do like these three things every day. Like, and I'd
Mm,
put it like somewhere where I could see it and like everything. Like for me, when it came to like culture, like something I really wanted was like everyone get a touch. You're going like summing out of a drill, like get a touch. Like if you come out of like, I feel like I'd say that like 100 times in a practice, and like
yeah,
you
yeah.
just gotta like rep it out basically, because then like it just becomes kind of like a innate thing. And the hardest part is understanding that that change takes time, especially from like a program where you're rebuilding. It's like in
Hmm.
your mind, it's almost impossible, but you're trying to tell yourself like winning isn't like your priority, which like feels almost crazy to say, but like in the back of your mind that it's really not. Like you just know that the bigger things, like, well, you have to like learn how to win, you have to like develop a culture, you have to learn how to prep, you have to learn how to develop your game. And so I think I was so hard on myself last year at times. Like I'd watch us and it would just be like, are we really doing those things? But
Yeah.
ultimately I think like it went better than I thought. Like I said to you before, we went 6-14, so we did improve over last year. And it's like for most people, they'd see that record and be like, well, that's not great. But you have to like you have to celebrate. Like we'd celebrate games
Yeah, it
like,
was still progress that was there.
yeah, and
Definitely.
you have to celebrate like you won the Super Bowl. Like, and it doesn't even matter who you played. Like we played a couple of non-leagues that were like the teams that we beat were not very good, but it's like you have to like play those types of teams to like actually learn how to win bigger games. Um, and so that was good. We clearly got a lot better in terms of like developing skill. Like we'd play league games, and early on we'd get absolutely smashed, and then we play a team a second time around and we play them a lot closer and a lot better. And like coaches kind of after the game would come up to me and they're like, wow, you guys are getting so much better.
Improvement, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
progress
like
being made.
you can feel it, like, and the kids felt it too. Like I think it took a while, but then like they realized like, oh, we actually hung in against a team. Like we played a team, Greater Lowell Tech, in our league, and they beat us by 40 the first time. Like we just got completely outplayed. And the second time we played them, like a month later, we were up 5 with like a minute 50 left. We
Yeah, isn't
ended up
that great?
losing. Yeah, we ended up losing, but it's like, like, wow, guys, like if, and the more like guys bought in, like, then like the culture just felt a lot better. You didn't feel like all this stress on your shoulders of like trying so hard to get everything to go the way you wanted to. Like guys are taking that on themselves. We had a lot of good young guys that just kind of, you know, started leading, and you didn't have to, if a kid started to like point the finger, you had kids being like, oh, well, like, whoa, like, no, we're good. Like, we don't need that. And
Hmm.
it made things really good for us, but didn't come without its shortcomings. Like I said, we got blown out a
Oh
lot,
yeah, it does
but like you
happen.
kind of, yeah, and you have to just like take those, and kind of move on. And it's really hard to, I think, as a player and as a coach. Like I remember we had our senior night and we played the best team in our league at this year and we lost by like 40. And I remember just kind of sitting like after the game, I just sat on the bench like when all the kids left for like 40 minutes just in a chair, and I'm just like staring at the court going like are we really this far behind?
Yeah, so definitely ups and downs for sure. And those losses, man, they trust me, it makes you feel like, did we make any progress, right? Are we going anywhere?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but like, it's just like you kind of just have to take them in stride and just kind of see the bigger picture. I think one of the big things I felt like I said a lot this year was, we weren't taking stuff seriously enough, kind of going back to what we talked about before we started, like having such a young team. I think like that maturity just wasn't there. Like so many of these guys have never played varsity basketball. So they're like, they goof around, or you're at practice and you're trying to make a teaching point and they're off on the side trying to do something, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, it gets frustrating. You want these guys, you want these kids to be successful, and you're trying to do everything in your power. And there were just times, like too many times I'd say, where I was like, guys, like I don't think we're taking this seriously enough. And um it did become an issue for a couple guys. Like we had to have some real one-on-ones with certain players. And then the really hard part, which it still like kind of makes me feel weird, but we had to kick a kid off the team.
Oh, really?
He was our leading scorer, and it was a lot of things that built up to it, but I think it was one of those things where that you need your culture to be the most important thing. And it got to a point where I think he thought he was above the team, and I kind of had to make that tough choice. And
Yeah. That's a big way to, kind of set the tone of culture, right? When you show that, hey, there are
yeah,
certain standards that, everybody has to be held to, and, you got to make maybe a bit of an uncomfortable decision at the moment, but I'm sure it resonated with the guys that were still with your program.
yeah, it was a really like, obviously I didn't, like, you don't take any enjoyment out of it. Like I really wanted this kid to be successful. It's just he really struggled with that type of stuff, like being part of a team. And like it also too kind of like not created a rift, but like I feel like it was like kids were on one side or the other. It's like the seniors he was friends with, like you could tell that they weren't about it. Like they didn't want that to be a thing. And you have like the young guys who are like very happy we did it. And like also too, like you have coaches and stuff who are like, oh, like these kids, like you could see like when these kids found out, like, oh wow, like coach isn't messing around. Like
Yeah.
like this obviously, like this isn't. I think ultimately they kind of saw that as like that was the big, like it was the hardest thing, but it was also like the big, like, oh, like
Yeah,
this
big wake up
definitely
call.
now this definitely now is not what last year was like, because there were kids that were worse than him that like kind of got away with it and played all. And like they, after that, like there was a huge shift in like attitude, and like things kind of went a lot better from like a day-to-day perspective. But yeah, it's a long process, man. Like I
Oh,
feel
yeah.
like it's like you're kind of just in the trenches every day, and you kind of have to remind yourself that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's probably not like your first year, but if you really like stick to your guns, and you do the things you believe in, and you build a culture that you believe in, like it will come. Like, what do they say, most programs take like 3 to 5 years to develop. And I think
Yeah,
like,
you gotta be patient. That's for
yeah, and
sure.
like we're on a really good track, but like we're probably still like a year away from like really being like what we can like peak out at and be at our absolute best.
How do you kind of consolidate the fact that you have guys who are, probably really passionate basketball players, been playing a lot and, have a lot of experience and take the game a certain way with, other players who aren't as experienced, maybe they don't take it as seriously, being in a position where you're not really cutting guys in tryouts. How do you kind of manage this like wide, array of both like kind of experience and buy-in and commitment level?
Yeah, I think honestly, like, I think you want to reward kids that are doing the right things. I think that's step one. Because I think the big thing kids hate is like if you're rewarding bad behavior, like why should they, go out of their way to do the right thing? So I think that's part of it. And then if you do have kids that are like young but kind of messing around, like, you it's a like kind of going back to what I said earlier, right? It's like you either like accept it or like you kind of like step in and do something about it. And so with some of these kids, like we had a sophomore this year he was on JV the year before I came, and he was a swing player for us this year. And he was someone that like, he'd be goofing off a lot. And, you kind of just have to have some like real honest conversations with these kids. And it's uncomfortable for them, but I think you just got to be clear, like, listen, like, this is why I'm getting upset. Like, if you're not taking it seriously, like, we can't play you. And it's like, you're not setting a good example for anyone else. Like, why should we play you if you're not 100% in? Because it's like, we have seniors that went through hell, right? Like they've been through some real tough seasons, and like they know that like we're not winning this year. Like they wanted to believe it. Like they wanted 10 wins, like, to get into the tournament in Massachusetts. But like realistically, we were never getting there. But like they showed up every day and they're putting in the hard work. It's like, well, you're not doing the guys that laid the foundation any favors. And so it's like and when your time comes, like we're not going to reward you for bad habits. Like you need to really understand like what it takes to be a varsity player. So I think for like a few guys, like, and some guys get it. Like that kid I mentioned, like when we met, we had exit interviews. Like he was very much like, hey, like I understand, like this is kind of how I was. Like I need to take a step in maturity. And like they'll be the ones that like make those strides and become varsity players. But like the unfortunate truth is like if you get kids who are young and like can't do that type of stuff, like ultimately you kind of just gotta like cut the cord, and it sucks, but it's like ultimately you got to make tough decisions. And if they're not going to buy in and do the right things, then you kind of have to go with guys that will.
Yeah, and but that goes back to those kind of like honest and open conversations, and I think just kind of piggybacking off of that too, where I've had girls that have come into my program who maybe not maybe weren't the most experienced or didn't have the most institutional knowledge and everything about basketball, and it was kind of those realistic conversations of like, look, like based on your experience level, there's probably going to be maybe a certain ceiling as to where it is that you can get, or, we can't get you necessarily great at everything in such a short time period. So you have to buy into all of these other aspects of the game and be fully committed to, things that maybe those more intangibles of like those heart, hustle, defense, a lot of those things that while they do require skill, maybe are not as intensive as things like ball handling and other sort of skills, and kind of make sure that they buy into these aspects where it's like, hey, if you're going to be here and your skill levels in here, these are like the non-negotiable, like mandatory, you have to be doing these things if you feel like playing sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Like it kind of, and like we said, it all centers around culture. Like you gotta, if you get people that are gonna work hard and buy in, like you reward them.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. You mentioned this a little bit, Coach, about some of the adjustments you've made to practice planning, but kind of going from the unstructured environment that was there previously to what you put in. So, did your practice planning, did it change from beginning, middle, end of the season? Were there adjustments that you made once you really started to work with your guys? How did you sort of, brainstorm the way that your practice structure was going to look like as the season was going on?
Yeah, so I think for like most of my coaching career, I've kind of stuck to like a practice plan like that I think works really well. Like for me, I think there's like five rules that like you need to have in a practice for it to be successful. I think one, you have to develop players. So like for me, we spend probably like 30, probably the first 30 minutes of practice, like just on pure like skill development. So it'll be like the footwork stuff, shooting, and maybe some type of, yeah, actually, no, we don't usually do the one-on-one defense until later, but like those first 30 minutes, we spend a lot of time on footwork and a lot of time on shooting. I think that's huge. Like you want to get better throughout the year, and like that's something you want to kind of be part of your identity. Teaching and drilling fundamentals, I think, is important. Like actually teaching kids like the stuff that you want them to do. Making drills competitive, I think that makes practices awesome. You really want like kids to push themselves, so like every drill we do is some type of competition. If they lose, they run. And you kind of get kids to get better that way. And I think ultimately when it comes to practice planning, something that I've gotten better at, but something that I've also put in a lot of time in, is like having a vision of what you want your team to look like. So you want to do drills that, or things that cater towards the style that you're trying to play. So for us, it's like, okay, we spend those first 30 minutes skill development. We'll always do like a 10 to 15-minute segment of transition offense. Like I really want to play fast. So it's like we always like do something, like whether it's advantage or just 5-on-0, like working on that like every single day. And then after that, like I really try to do a lot of 5-on-5, like half court, full court. Like drills are great. I think though, like a lot of times, like ultimately, like you want, it transitions throughout the year too. I think like offense, for example, it's like that first 2-3 weeks, you're just trying to like skeleton your entire offense. So it's like, okay, if you put in a motion offense or whatever, it's like you're trying to just do like 5-on-0, 3-on-0, 3-on-3, like, trying to build those concepts. Whereas like later in the season, you're probably like, in terms of offense, you might be doing like situational stuff. Like, okay, we're down 4 with 3 minutes left. Like we're working on whatever, like running sets, or like, okay, like end of the quarter, stuff like that. Or like maybe like small tweaks, like, hey, we're not setting good screens off of like this. So it's like, I think throughout the year, it's like you get a lot more hands off. Whereas like early on, you're like, you're the teacher, you're the instructor, you're giving direct
Putting everything
instruction.
in, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you have to put in a bunch of structure that they're not used to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so like I think like having a routine is like really good, or having like a general script to practice. Like, I try to like, sometimes I'll sprinkle in stuff like here and there, but I think really trying to like keep practice to like a certain routine is pretty good. And leaving a lot of time just for like not just playing up and down 5-on-5, but we do try to do a lot of like full court stuff, just, very like situational and like purposeful. Like sometimes I really think like instead of just running like 8-minute quarter or whatever, it's like, okay, like these 4 minutes we're going to be in like this defense, or like this
Yeah.
segment of offense, like we're only going to focus on like this. And like it makes it easier for you as a coach too, because like, you don't want to be sitting there blowing the whistle every possession, being like, oh, we wanted to do this or that. I think like coming in those segments with like a couple of teaching points makes it a little better for yourself and the kids. Um, yeah, I think too, just like kind of going back to the competitive stuff, like some stuff that I found is like really, really good is defensively. Like I really like doing drills that like 5-on-5 or 4-on-4 drills that are competitive based. So one that I got from Gonzaga from Mark Few is, he calls it like cutthroat. And so it's just shell drill, like live 5-on-5, but it's to like 7, and it has to be like a perfect rep to get a point. And so what I do is like, I always like to be like the a-hole in the situation, because like I'll like pin kids for doing like, being like, just like they'll be like one step off the helpline, and like I'll blow the whistle, or like they don't communicate. And it's like, what I found interesting about it was like, obviously the kids get like pissed at you about it because they want to win the drill. But something I noticed, like the more we did it, was they'd start holding each other accountable. Like they'd be on offense and they'd be like, oh, coach, like, you see that? Like he's not communicating, or like he doesn't have his hand
Yeah,
up.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then like they honestly start to like really buy into the stuff that we were trying to do, which I thought was great. Same thing with like offense. Like they'd really like, you know, it almost promotes them to like hold each other accountable, which I thought was kind of interesting. But those are like kind of like staples of practice, like fundamentals, keeping drills competitive, and a lot of like up and down, like 5-on-5 stuff that's like very scripted and like trying to focus on like a couple of really key points.
Yeah, and you're in such a unique position, right? Where I'm sure, and you talked about this, there's so much that it is that you want to do, and not as coaches that we ever want to like let things go and not, address them. But for you, I imagine that just that process of figuring out, you know, how do I try and maximize the most I can out of this practice, knowing that like I can't cover all the things that I want. I imagine that's something that's kind of a still maybe like an ongoing, kind of topic that you're wrestling with, trying to, maximize your time and get the most out of it, knowing, hey, these are the things I really would like to do, but maybe I can only focus on, X, Y, and Z and get these things done, all while trying to also establish like the culture of what your practices want to look like. I know for me that's always when I took over at a new spot, that was always something that I balanced, and I'm wondering also if that's kind of something that you're still grappling with too.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think for the first part, going off of like, trying not to nitpick at everything, I think the big thing that like every coach can take is like the first like half of the season, like I think honestly it just comes down to like getting your stuff in. Like it, not everything's going to be perfect, but like if you have like, your offense in, your defenses and like plays and stuff, then you can actually like use that second half of the season where it's like, okay, like now we can be a little more like detail oriented on like, oh, like working like this like 2-on-2 or like 3-on-3, like, hey, watching the film, this isn't working, why don't we like work on this? Or like I think just like getting as much in, just having it and like doing 5-on-5 and like learning stuff, I think is really valuable. And then yeah, kind of going back to the culture thing, you're always struggling with it because obviously your focus is getting better at practice and putting in things that you think will help your team win. But like I think like just sometimes like using those moments, like really being keen on like, okay, like I have to like make sure that like we're doing these things. So like I mentioned when we were talking about kind of like the process of rebuilding the program, like I remember looking at my practice plans and like, I have like time, like drill and like notes. And I remember in the notes section, like I literally put like on every single like drill, like I'd be like, get a touch. I'd write like in all caps and bold. I'd be like, get a touch. Like, are we holding each other accountable or like, are we,
Yeah,
whatever it is, like, and just kind of like forcing yourself to do it because like the skills and stuff are great when you're coming into a program, but you have to realize that like it's a long process and like the culture part's honestly more important than the actual like basketball that you put out on the court.
as you are thinking about um, this past season and reflecting, and I know you talked about this a little bit, but um, what are some of the challenges, or what were some specific challenges that you faced that maybe you weren't necessarily like thinking about, or maybe caught you off guard? Were there certain things that that you weren't really ready for, or didn't anticipate, or maybe you did anticipate and we're still dealing with them anyway? And how did you kind of overcome those and still, continue the momentum that you had built with the program?
Yeah, we had a lot of challenges and I think a lot that I didn't see. I knew it'd be tough, but a lot I didn't. So the first one was the no cut policy. And so we had 90 kids signed up at the start of the season and we had 3 teams. And I'll be honest, like it was a mess. Like it just was. And it makes sense because it's basketball's like just not a sport where you can have that many kids. Like
Right.
we had 40 kids on our freshman team, like
Oof.
30 something on our JV. And you're trying to, like you just kind of have to tell the kids like straight up, like, look, like we're not going to be like this functioning unit. Like we're just not, because like some of you guys just should not be here. Like you have to like keep it super basic and like we're trying to like, build a culture that these younger guys can buy into. It's something that I think we've thrown a lot of ideas out there. Like we've thought about, doing an intramural league. We've thought about making like a JVA, JVB team. It's so hard, like, because you need the coaches then. So we've put a lot of thought into it, and I don't think we'll really know until next year what that looks like. But that was a big struggle. Like there's so many kids and you don't know them and you're trying to figure out like who are the guys that we're trying to put time and effort into
Yeah,
developing. So
absolutely.
um the skill gap compared to the rest of the league. I think in my mind, I was very naive. Like I watched us in the first couple of weeks of practice and I was like, all right, like when I coached at Tewksbury, we played like all the best teams in Massachusetts. Like half the conference is all like Division 1, like high level Division 1 teams in Mass. And so I'm kind of thinking to myself, like, oh, like, I've coached against those types of teams and we were always the underdog. Like,
Yeah.
and we just like, we weren't close to pretty much every team we played. Like I think we went 0-12 in league games, and there was really like two. I think there were like 2 or 3 that we actually kept close. And so I don't think I realized like how far away we were. And once we played our first game, like I was just like, okay, like we just like I think the message the whole year was like, all right, guys, like if we want to win games, like we have to be the hardest working team in the state. And so
Outwork everyone. Yeah.
yeah, and you're just like, you're being hard on them. And like, it's just like having them understand, like, well, we need to bridge a gap that's just not manageable. Like it's just not. And just kind of realizing it's a marathon, not a sprint, but like we have to just make any strides we can. So we really emphasize like taking the small victories, like doing what we could. And then when this off season rolled around, it was like, okay, like we sat down as a program and I laid out this big thing. I called it Operation Bridge the Gap. And it was like, how are we going to get from being this far behind to like caught up? And like, I think kids appreciated that. The coaching staff was another thing. Like we had 3 coaches, like great guys. Like I love them all. Awesome guys, but they had 0 basketball background. So it's like, if you have coaches that at least have a background, you can like teach the, philosophies and stuff, but like, it just wasn't manageable. That'd be like, if you're asking me to coach like defense and football. So it's like, I'm trying to sit there and make like practice plan templates, like show them drills, like what's our offense look like. And it was just, it just wasn't manageable. So luckily, like this upcoming year, I already have a lot of people who like we're going to put in our coaching staff that's like pretty good. But I don't think I thought about that just because I didn't have the time to with getting hired so early or so late in the process. But I think having a really good coaching staff is huge.
Sure.
And then the last thing that I didn't realize was gym time. So our school has one gym. It's like one full court, like 2 or 4 side hoops, but like the side courts aren't like real, like actual size courts. And we had 5 teams. So we have 3 boys teams, 2 girls teams. And the kids leave at 6 p.m. because we pull from 11 school districts. So, like the freshman team would practice for like an hour, not even. Like JV had to bus to like a community college near us and like practice for an hour. And then like we'd kind of have to like battle. Like sometimes we get 2 hours, sometimes we'd only get like 90 minutes because like wrestling was in there for me. It was just like, it was never a consistent practice schedule. And it's just hard. Like kids weren't always able to make it. And like, so I kind of just like made the decision like next year, it's like, guys, like we have to get rides. Like we have to go like 6 to 8 o'clock, like have the gym to ourselves and open it up too to like the JV teams, like give them a chance to practice in the full court. Cause when they went to this community college, like they would have like half the court, or like the freshman team, you have 40 kids. It's just, it was just a mess.
I wanted to ask before we hit our concluding segment, Coach, about, if you were to talk to somebody right now, which may be one of our listeners right now, who's in this position where they are taking over a program that's brand new, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give them about, hey, this is definitely what works, and you want to definitely, make sure you're doing this right away, or hey, this is what I did that maybe I wouldn't do if I was in this situation again? What would a couple things be that you would tell somebody who is maybe going to be entering a similar position that you were in just a year ago?
I think the big thing is trust the process, right? Like, you whoever is out there, like, you put in so much work and you do so much that like you want to put yourself in that position to even be considered as a varsity coach. And you get to that point, like, you just got to trust yourself. Like you put yourself in a great position and you have a lot of ideas. Trust yourself, put them in place and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Definitely.
the big thing I think that I did well was like, you have to prioritize the culture first. Like, assuming you're in a rebuild, like you have to make that the big thing. Like, obviously we want to win and we want our kids to, be able to experience that, but like ultimately, like, you're at, it's going to take time, and you just have to remind yourself of that every day. Like, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to lose games badly, but if you can really like set yourself up for success in the long run, like that's where your head's got to be. And I think the other thing I would really like suggest people do is, in that first year especially, like spend more time at practice just like developing skills and like basic skills
Mm.
versus like focusing on, like, oh, we want to like run plays and do this. Because I think something I didn't realize, like kind of I mentioned in the practice planning, was there's so many things that I didn't realize our kids didn't really know how to do. And the fact that they weren't all on board with the skill development, I kind of got away from it a little earlier than I would have
Would have
wanted.
wanted to. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like I should have just like put my head down and be like, nope, like we're like, I don't care if you guys think it's basic. Like, if you want to be a good team, like you have to do these things. And so I think just kind of forcing yourself to be okay with the fact that like you're you're focusing more on just developing good players than like your actual like system and like ways of winning games, I think is just going to set you up for a lot of success in the long run. Because then kids are learning, the skills you want them to, and they get a year to really master their craft. And by the next season, you're in a much better place to kind of start putting more stuff in and thinking more like big picture stuff.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. That's something too where sometimes it's a tough balance, right? That you mentioned where there's stuff that you really want to do and there's stuff that you want to put in, and sometimes you feel like players aren't really like whether it's really like bought into it or they're not really like getting it or it's not really like something that's clicking, and so you kind of go through this dilemma of like, wait, is it a me thing, like is this something I gotta like tweak or get rid of or change completely different, or is it something I need to like push forward on and like really make sure that like we do and make sure our players understand the importance of this. And it's something that you kind of mentioned, right, about like sticking to those principles or those things that you know are important and not getting away from them. I know that's something that I did early when I started coaching. If I felt that like something was taking too long, I'd just scrap it immediately. But then I'd reflect and go back later, and be like, "Oh man, I probably shouldn't have done that." Now I got to go back into the next year and really like focus on it and not like abandon it right away.
Yeah, I think like now, and plus too, like kind of like building off that, like use that too as like a chance to reflect on like what you would do different next year. Like,
Hmm.
I really like, I write down like those ideas. Don't be like, oh, like think about that when like you're in season. Like, really spend time in the off season. Like, I made like a doc. It's like, okay, like these are the things, and like if there was something I really wanted to emphasize, like highlight it and be like, okay, like we have to get this in the first like 2 or 3 weeks. And like I think just kind of like keeping yourself organized and reflecting is like a really good skill to have as a coach. Because sometimes I think you might just be like, oh, we just weren't a good team. Like, it is what it is. Like, no, like really try to think like, well, what can you do that's actually going to like help kids improve? Because it comes down to us. Like, they need the tools to succeed, and we have to like be aware of what our strengths are and what we need to get better at.
Definitely. Coach, to wrap up, there's a couple questions that I ask every guest, so I'll jump right in with this first one, which is thinking back on your coaching career, whether it's this past season or in previous seasons, what is a specific moment from your coaching career that you think by sharing our listeners would be able to learn from?
I think for me, like the a moment that always sticks in my mind was my first year at Tewksbury. We went 3-17. We were very similar to Whittier. Now we were in a full rebuild, but I remember I was just like this, volunteer assistant. I'm trying to make my way in, and we were playing a team, Waltham in Mass, and they were a team that was like pretty up and coming. But I remember I always made the scouting reports for our team, and I watched them play, and they ran a lot of sets, and I was like, I basically like, I'd give coach the like, the information, but I never really was like, hey, we should do this or that. And it was kind of one of those games where I just remember I'm like, hey, why don't we cover stuff like this way, or why don't we do this?
Mm.
And it was one of those things where we like we probably should have won the game. We gave up like a game winning three with like 15 seconds left. But I remember in my mind, I felt like this sense of like, wow, like I had a huge influence on the game. Like I had all their plays written down. Like I knew
Right.
like they'd call like, and I'm like sniffing them out, and we're
Mhm.
and it was one of those things where like I think as an assistant coach, the best advice after that gave me was like always think like a head coach. Like I think if you're like a freshman coach, think like how you would for a varsity coach. Like what would you do? And like because I think sometimes it's easy to like sit there when you're not the guy calling the shots, being like, oh well, like in hindsight we should have done this or that. Like I think kind of like seeing the game from like a head coach's perspective and trying to like think that way like really tries to like enhance your game, because or enhance your ability as a coach at whatever level you're at, whether you're an assistant or JV coach, just because I think if you want to get to that stage, like you have to really think like, well, all right, like if you are the coach, like you do have to prepare for these games, you do have to prepare practice, like you have to be able to make these changes. And so that was like a huge thing for me. And I think another thing was, I remember in the off season I was watching film and I kind of just tracked on like huddle, like, oh, this is where we're turning the ball over, because I we were a team that turned it over a lot, and it was like, okay, like we identified what it was, and then it was like it really shifted like my whole philosophy as a coach. It was like, okay, like we're turning it over because we don't play off 2 feet and we leave our feet, or like and we throw bad passes, or like we don't establish a pivot foot and we travel. And so like I think just kind of like being a problem solver, not like an identifier, is big. I think a lot of times you might sit there and be like, oh well, we're giving up too many straight line drives, or we're not hitting shots. And it's like it's really easy, I think, as a coach to just sit there and be upset about it. But being able to actually like be adaptable and trying to work to actually come up with a solution is just like so valuable, because I think sometimes we just get too upset about it to just be like, oh, it's because we don't have kids that are good enough or this or that. Like
Right.
being open to like really trying to problem solve and come up with something new is really important.
Yeah, it's to your last point, right? It's so easy to think, I think, as coaches about the things we don't have, and dwell on that, or think about like where we aren't as a program and where we want to be, or what other teams or other programs have. But that's such a misuse of energy and a misuse of time. And I think if you're truly committed to your program and your players, then as you talked about, alerts of like scouting or some of these other things, like it is your job to put yourself and put your players in position to be as successful as possible. And I think, taking time and dwelling on things that you don't have, or the stuff that you wish you did have, or what other people have, I think that's just a big misuse of energy, and is going to lead to probably, just worse outcomes for your players, because you're not spending time growing your players. You're dwelling on things that are, out of your control.
Yeah, definitely. Just like, we have who we have. And
Yep.
like if you're a public, yeah, you can't be looking at other teams like, oh, if we had more size, and that, like you don't, it kind of like you said, it's like, all right, like what can we do with what we have? And the more time you spend doing that, like the better you're off you're gonna be.
Coach, to wrap up, I give every guest what I like to call a 60-second soapbox. But you can go over 60 seconds. It's just my title that I like to put to things. But I like to use it as a platform for you to get out a final idea, a closing message, a closing thought, just something that you want to leave the listeners with. You can take it any direction that you want, basketball wise or coaching wise, because, it's your soapbox after all. So, Coach, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor, and just go ahead again and let you just take it from here.
Okay, this one is weird because it's not necessarily high school basketball, but
Okay.
I really want people who either like coach AAU, or you have kids that are part of AAU programs, like just please do not sit in a crappy 2-3 zone or whatever else. Like you are doing your kids such a disservice. Like I can't explain like how many games that I've coached this spring where we just play a team where they're just kind of like sitting in a zone and like being very lazy about it, and they use it as a cop out because you're playing teams that don't know how to break it. And it's like if you're a parent and you see that, like please find another program. Like you're not helping your kid. Like sure, they might win a free t-shirt on a Sunday afternoon, but like you want you want your kids to be getting better. And I think like using that, since it's so important now, is like for kids to develop, they need to play basketball. But like being part of a program, like and understanding like, okay, it's going back to kind of what we talked about, like it's more important for kids to develop as players first, like just be part of teams that can win. So it's just, I don't know, it's a gripe I've had this spring, and I just wanted to be aware, because I see way too much of it and it drives me up a wall. Like I just see a lot of these kids who I think if they were in my program, I'd be like, like this isn't the best thing for you.
The amount of conversations I hear, Coach, from people who talk about the way basketball is being played just to win at the youth level, or teams that are going into zones and 7-year-old or 8-year-old tournaments and stuff like that. It's amazing. I think to your point, right? If especially at the youth level and even at the younger levels of high school, like man, player development is just so important, and the opportunities and the skills that our players miss out on when we just try and chase victories at a young age, versus growing and developing our players. Man, it's tough. It's tough to watch as somebody who's been to and kept the score, and been involved in some of those tournaments at a youth level. I've seen some amazing youth coaches who do great work, and you can tell they don't care whatsoever about the score. They're just trying to have players get better, versus the ones that do. And you're right, it's kind of the Wild West out there, isn't it?
It's unfortunate. And like the thing that's tough too is like I see like, I understand that like a lot of these AAU coaches, especially like ones that aren't coaching high school, they're not high school coaches. But it's like for me, it's like I see it and it's so hard to like keep my mouth shut about it, just because like where you are like in your position, and it's just like you would never want that from like people. Like you don't want kids to just kind of be like chasing like these small victories, because like ultimately when they actually get to high school, you're just doing them a disservice, because it's like, oh, you can't cover one-on-one, or you can't do this like basic stuff. It's like, well then who's left to blame for like why certain kids maybe don't get to where they want to be in high school.
Definitely. No, no, 100% will co-sign that, Coach. Coach, I really do appreciate it. We could probably talk for hours and hours more about everything related to player development and program development, all the things about building a program from scratch. But I loved hearing your journey and your story and the things that you did, especially in such a unique situation that you are in at Whittier Tech with the no cut policy and all the other things that you are, working with. But I love hearing about what it is that you're doing, the way that you're keeping your passion and the excitement, and especially the parts where you talked about your players really getting excited and them noticing the difference from where the program was to where it's going now, which is really exciting. So Coach Stein, again, I really appreciate you coming on here and chatting with us and talking about where your program has started, and I'm really excited to see where it continues to go as you build through a strong off season and into next year. So again, Coach, really appreciate it. Thank you, and best of luck. Keep doing great things going forward.
Thanks so much, Coach. I appreciate the words.
Thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.